Welcome to the Minnesota Family Law Podcast, where we spend a few minutes answering your questions about Minnesota divorce and family law without the hourly rate. Here we go.
It really does. And the setup is just wild. The whole legal process kicks off for this guy when he gets served papers, official legal notice on his chair in the Minnesota Twins clubhouse at Target Field.
Not exactly where you expect legal documents to land. It's quite the image.
Totally. It's like, bam, reality check. What happened overseas? It's here now.
Exactly. A very clear signal.
So, okay, in this deep dive, we're going to unpack this case. We need to understand the legal tool Minnesota uses. It's called MUFSA. See how these international orders actually get handled here. And importantly, figure out what this means for you potentially if you have family obligations that cross state lines or even country lines.
Yeah, it's a practical look at how geography doesn't just erase legal responsibilities.
Okay, let's set the scene. The person involved here is a Minnesota Twins pitcher, Jay Jackson.
Right. The article calls him a journeyman pitcher, which, means he's bounced around a bit.
Played for quite a few teams.
Yeah, half the teams in pro baseball, I think the source said. And crucially, he spent time playing in Japan for the Hiroshima Toyo Carp.
Okay, Japan. That's where this story really takes root.
Correct. While he was over there, he met Masami Kiya. They had a child together back in 2018.
And then?
Well, the relationship ended. And later, in 2021, a Japanese court issued a child support order against him.
Okay, a Japanese court order. But wasn't he already gone by then?
That's a key point, yeah. By the time that order came down in 2021, he'd already left Japan. He was back in the U.S., pitching stateside again.
So the order's in Japan, he's in the U.S. How does it follow him all the way to Minnesota?
Well, fast forward a bit. He signs with the Minnesota Twins, starts playing for them early 2024.
Right.
And here's the detail the source really flags as important. When he moved to Minnesota for the team, he signed a lease, an apartment lease in Minneapolis.
Ah, okay. Seems like a normal thing to do, signing a lease. But you're saying that's actually a really big deal in this legal situation.
Oh, absolutely critical.
Yep.
It established a clear tie, a physical presence in Minnesota.
Gotcha.
And that presence is what gave Masami Kiya the opening she needed. It let her use Minnesota's own laws to go after the support owed under the Japanese order.
And that law she used, that's the MUFSA thing you mentioned.
Exactly. MUF stands for Minnesota Uniform Interstate Family Support Act. It's basically Minnesota's rule book for dealing with support orders from other places.
Other states or even other countries?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this case, another country, Japan. MUFs lays out how Minnesota recognizes and enforces those orders.
So she used this Minnesota law, MUFSA, to get the Japanese order officially registered here.
That's the process. Registering it under MUFSA essentially gives the Japanese order the same legal weight as if it had been issued by a Minnesota court originally.
Makes it enforceable here.
Precisely. Enforceable using Minnesota's tools.
Which brings us back to that moment in the clubhouse. Target Field. The notice about this registration lands on his chair. The source called it like a 90-mile-per-hour fastball, legally speaking.
It's a vivid way to put it, isn't it? No ambiguity there. The legal game is officially on, right here in Minnesota.
Okay, so he gets this notice. Did he just accept it, or does he fight back?
Oh, he definitely challenged it.
Okay.
She didn't want the Japanese order enforced in Minnesota.
What were his arguments? What did he tell the court?
According to the article, he had two main points. First, he argued he didn't live in Minnesota permanently. Baseball season is temporary, so he shouldn't be considered a resident for this purpose.
Trying to say he was just like passing through, not really putting down roots.
Kind of, yeah. His second argument was about the Japanese system itself. He claimed Japan's child support laws were just too different from Minnesota's.
How so? Different?
So different, he argued, that the order shouldn't be recognized or enforced here under Minnesota's rules, under MUFSA. Sort of like saying the rules are incompatible.
Comparing apples and oranges, legally speaking.
Something like that was the idea.
Yeah.
But the Minnesota Court of Appeals heard him out, and they didn't buy it. They rejected both arguments.
So the court wasn't persuaded. The article used that baseball analogy again, right? They called the ball.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, the source notes the judge who wrote the opinion, Judge Kevin G. Ross, apparently has a background coaching Little League. A nice little side detail.
Maybe he knows a ball when he sees one. So how did Judge Ross and the court dismantle Jackson's arguments? Let's start with the residency thing. How did they decide he was living here enough for the law to apply?
Well, it loops right back to that lease.
Mm-hmm.
The court pointed squarely at the fact he signed a lease for a place in Minneapolis. That plus obviously his job with the twins being located here, that established a sufficient connection. The court really zeroed in on the language in Iwifsa. It's not about permanent residence, like settling down forever.
Right.
The key term the source highlights is living here indefinitely.
Indefinitely. Okay, what's the practical difference between indefinitely and permanently here?
Well, indefinitely just means you're here without a specific fixed end date right around the corner. A baseball season, even though everyone knows it ends eventually, means you're living and working here for a substantial period. It's not like a 2-week vacation.
Makes sense.
Signing that lease just solidified it. The court said, yep, that counts. That meets the threshold for Minnesota to have jurisdiction here just for enforcing this existing order.
So even if he felt his time here was temporary, signing that lease created the legal hook Minnesota needed.
That seems to be the court's view, yes. It established the necessary connection under the law.
Okay, and what about the other argument? That the Japanese system was just too different?
The court shot that down, too. They looked at Japan's child support laws and found they were substantially similar to Minnesota's.
Substantially similar, even if the details aren't identical.
Exactly. Maybe the mechanisms aren't the same. The source mentions Japan might not use automatic income withholding quite like we do here.
Okay.
But the core point was that Japan does have ways to enforce payment. There are legal mechanisms to make someone pay child support. That fundamental similarity, that the goal, the existence of enforcement tools, was enough.
Enough for Minnesota to say, okay, we recognize this, we can enforce this under MWIFSA.
That's what the court concluded. So his efforts to dodge the enforcement based on location or legal differences, they just didn't hold up.
Yeah, the article's line fits perfectly. His pitch has already crossed the plate, and it's been called a ball.
It really does capture the court's decision quite well. No ambiguity.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. This is a fascinating story about a baseball player, but what's the real takeaway message for everyone else, for you listening?
I think the core lesson, which the source really hammers home, is that child support obligations are incredibly sticky. They really do follow you no matter where you go.
And anywhere truly means anywhere, across international borders, too.
Absolutely. The article is explicit about this. Doesn't matter if it's another state or another country, Japan, Jamaica, or just over the Iowa border, as the source puts it.
Wow.
If a valid order exists somewhere, chances are very, very high that the legal systems can make it catch up with you if you establish yourself somewhere else.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? You can't just move away from the responsibility for your child. Changing jobs, changing states, even changing countries. It doesn't just make the obligation disappear.
It really underscores that. And this case is a perfect illustration. Minnesota courts, using their tool, MWIFSA, are clearly willing and able to enforce international support orders.
As long as that connection is there.
Right. As long as there's that sufficient presence, living here, working here, signing that lease, establishing that tie for what the law considers an indefinite period.
So, trying to ignore an order from overseas, then coming here and setting up shop, even temporarily for a job, that basically creates the perfect conditions for MWIFSA to step in.
It certainly looks that way based on this ruling. You create the link, the law provides the bridge for enforcement.
So what's the latest on this specific case? Is this ruling the final word?
Well, the source does mention that Jackson technically could try to appeal this decision to the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Okay.
But given how thoroughly the Court of Appeals addressed and rejected his arguments, the article kind of implies the odds of the Supreme Court even taking the case, let alone overturning the decision, probably aren't very high.
Right. Seems pretty clear-cut based on the reasoning we've discussed.
Yeah.
So wrapping this up, the big lesson from this deep dive, told through this baseball story, is just how far-reaching child support laws really are. They cross state lines, they cross international borders, and making a clean connection to a place, even something as simple as signing a lease or taking a job, can be enough for that place to enforce an obligation that started somewhere else entirely.
It really drives home that geography isn't the shield. Maybe some people think it is. These legal mechanisms like MWIFSA here in Minnesota, they're specifically designed to bridge those distances.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how globalized everything is now. Not just work and travel, but our personal legal lives too.
And that actually brings up a final thought for you to consider, something building on this. As people keep moving more freely across borders for jobs, for family, for whatever reason, how is this going to continue to test and maybe reshape international family law? How will these enforcement systems need to adapt? It's definitely a space where we might see more challenges, more evolution in the years ahead.
If you found this podcast helpful, chances are you'll love the blog mancatofamilylaw.com. Also, the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen. We cover real-world family law and divorce issues like parenting time schedules, child support changes, domestic abuse allegations and protections, and what really happens in a Minnesota divorce trial. Subscribe now and take control of your family law case, one episode at a time.